Hello guys, welcome back to the Beastie Room. Today I thought we would have a bit of a chat and a discussion on some of the many questions we get asked. And the ones I thought we'd do today are to do with enclosure sizes, and also we're going to touch a little bit on substrate as well. Now these are topics that have been floating around the hobby from the year dot, and they cause an awful lot of confusion, or it appears to be a lot of confusion, especially amongst new people to the hobby, and also to some of the old and tried and tested people as well. Some of these things, the topic of enclosure size and substrate depth have been doing the rounds for years, and it seems to me that most of the information that we're getting out there today is the same information that we were getting 20-30 years ago, and things have moved on an awful lot. We've learned a whole lot more, we do a lot more, and it's about time, I believe, that some of this information is brought into the present day, because to be totally frank with you, some of the questions that we get asked are like, you have to ask yourself, you're like, really, is this really a common sense thing, or is it that difficult to understand? Now what I'm going to share with you today is what I have been doing here in the Beastie Room for many years, and I'm not saying it's the only way to do things. This is most important. There's many ways of reaching the same end goal. So this is just my experience and how things have worked for me, and how we get success by using these methods here in the Beastie Room. And to my way of thinking, that is far more important and valuable than regurgitated stuff from 20-30 years ago. You know, we must move on. One of the biggest things that we need to do in order to do that is to actually change our thought process. And what I would ask you all to do, and this has been coming from comments that we've been getting mainly from people that don't even keep spiders. They've just happened on the channel, and they sort of come off and they're like, wow, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. Well, first things first, how you can have an opinion on something you don't actually do, I have no idea whatsoever. But, you know, the general thing is, take away your human emotion. Look on what you're doing as a project. You've got an end result in mind. You're going in a certain direction, and this is the most important thing. Take away the emotion. Spiders are not emotional creatures, and by putting our emotions into what we think that spider requires is the totally wrong way to go about your hobby. It just isn't necessary. You know, you're missing the whole point of what you're trying to achieve. And by using your own human emotions, you're never ever going to move forward. Never ever. So what I'm going to suggest is, now we're going to have a little talk about enclosure sizes. We'll start with that. Now, we see on the net that enclosure sizes, I often get asked, I've got this spider, what is the correct size enclosure to keep that spider? Well, to be totally honest with you, I couldn't tell you. I honestly don't know, because I don't know what you intend to do with that spider. So the question is not what is the best size enclosure for a particular species of spider. The question is, what do you want to do with that spider? And that will answer your question as to where you need to be and how you go forward. Now, you'd have seen on videos that we've done recently, where we moved our some of our slings from tiny sling pots upgraded them up into other pots, which then in turn went to other pots, and so on and so on and so on. And we explained the reason why we do that here in the Beastie Room. And it is purely because we want our spiders to grow as strong and healthy as possible. And we got asked, You know, couldn't we have skipped 1 or 2 stages and gone from that pot straight up to a big pot? Well, you can do if you want, but in my experience, it pays to give them. You're better off having an extra rehouse or 2 and having a good solid spider at the end of it than you are by taking them from a small enclosure, putting them bang straight into a big enclosure. You know, I don't get why there is a rush to actually move them. By rehousing your spider, you are not causing it any troubles whatsoever. You know, we get the argument that, oh, you've upset it because it built its house, you know, and it had a lovely place to live, and it done all of this, and you've gone in there and you've destroyed it. You've made it homeless. Well, what on earth do you think happens to your garden spider in the garden, you know, or in your shed? You open your shed door, you rip the web down, come tomorrow morning, it's built a new one. You know, these guys are designed to be able to deal with this kind of thing in the natural state. So we've not done everything. You see what we're doing there? We put a human emotion into, we've made that spider homeless. Did we? Hell, we didn't make it homeless. You know, it's going to go straight in there and build a new home. So, you know, again, take away the emotion and we can get back to doing what's best for the spider. And for us here, we've found over the years that by going up in small increments, we end up with much, much better spiders at the end of the day. And I think you can all guarantee, you know, you can all see from previous videos, our spiders, we absolutely pride ourselves on the quality of the spiders that we produce here in the Beastie Room. And the ones that, you know, we breed from, they are all in tip-top condition. So for me, that is proof enough in the pudding. I don't need to worry about what is going on with what everyone else is doing. I'm happy with how we're doing it. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at a good example now in terms of enclosure sizes. Now we take the Balfouri. Are we looking at getting a communal Balfouri? Because that will need a different size enclosure. Are we looking at having a single Balfouri on its own? Again, one of the things that pops up there is, well, that's cruel because they all live together. And then on the other half of the fence, we've got them all saying, wow, I never knew you could keep these spiders together. So there's so much misinterpretation of information. So for us here in the Beastie Room, we keep our adult females, that is an adult Balfouri, we keep her in a 20 by 20 by 20 cube, which is these guys here, these tanks here. These are all 2020 cubes. Now, the reason we stick with these, many people will turn around and say that is far too small for an adult Balfouri. Now then, if we come down here, we can go down into this enclosure here, another 2020 cube. This has got an adult female Balfouri in it, and I think you might be able to see in there, there is actually an egg sac that's hatched out, and we have got around about 50 odd babies in that enclosure, along with mum. Now you'll also see there's no depth of substrate here. We've literally got a couple of inches of substrate, that is all. Very, very little. We've got a piece of bark that runs along the back, that gives them their security, and we use a blackout board as well, and that gives the spider, our female spider, the security that she needs. It gives her the impression that she's actually living in a hole. So it's achieved what we wanted it to do. So that's that. That is a breeding tank for our female Balfouris. And I think you can see there, the proof is in the pudding. We've got babies. And it's not something that's just happened in that tank. It happens, all of these down the bottom here are all Balfouri, and some of these up the top here are Balfouri as well. And we've bred them all. And they do it consistently. And this is the big thing. This is the key. They are doing it consistently, which shows or proves to me that what we're doing and how we're doing it is working at its most optimum thing. So we've got everything correct, everything's in place, and it's all working well. So when we come back to the discussion of what size enclosure do we need, well, that's a 2020 by 20 cube. Now the most important thing is not how big is our enclosure, how good is our environment. Yeah, so what we've shown there is we have got our environmental parameters exactly where we need them. They're perfect, absolutely perfect, because our spider is not only growing well, it's breeding well, it's hatching egg sacs off, and it's rearing young. It's doing everything that we need to do. I mean, another good example, if we look here as well, we can see we have another female Balfouri up here. Look at the condition of that spider. Now, she has already been paired. She's got some bark behind there which she can web up, she can sit behind. This one actually chooses to sit out most of the time. She's near enough always out. And one of the things we'll notice as well is very, very few of our female Balfouris that we keep singly ever bother to burrow. Most of them will just sit out on the top, or they'll go behind their piece of bark and they sit behind there. So we've covered all of the parameters. We've done everything that's necessary. Now, you'll quite often see on the information on the net that, oh, they should have X amount of burrowing to be able to survive and be happy. That is just, I'm not going to say it's wrong, but it's another way of looking at it. We can, you can add more to it if you need to. I have found with ours, we don't need to. And we're breeding, we're doing them, and they're doing it consistently. So this is what I'm trying to get to you, is it's pays to do it. If we are looking at doing a communal of Balfouris, whether it be a small one or a large one, we're looking at an entirely different setup now. It's a different thing. So when you ask that question, what size enclosure is best? This is why we need to know what it is you intend to do. Now, if you're going to do a communal, we could do a communal in a tank that is a 30 by 30. Most of our fossorial spiders we put in 30 by 30s, so we can use them, perfectly adequate. I mean, you could keep 15, 20 Balfouri in one of them, no problem at all. If you want a display tank, then we're looking at something else, aren't we? So we're looking at something bigger, and we want to actually make a display of it, like we've done with our big communal, which we'll have a look at in a minute. And we can come back and have a look at that. And it's a much, much bigger prospect. But the most important thing is it doesn't matter what size we're in, we keep our parameters. We've got to get our environmental aspects down to key. They've got to be spot on. And that is what makes a healthy spider, not the insides of the enclosure. So we change things around. Now, if we look at other things, I mean, you'd have remembered we keep our male spiders in small enclosures. And this is because they actually, as soon as they hit maturity, they go off and they start searching for females. And they do this in the wild. So they go on walkabout. And they're out there and they're searching all over the place. And they will hunt high and low to find a female. When they find that female, you probably find she hasn't left her little hole in the tree or a hole in the floor for the past 3 or 4 years. She's not had to go anywhere at all. She has literally built her home. She waits for food to come along, and then, and that is it. That's her life. Now, when we look at things like fossorial spiders, we come into the realms of how much substrate do we need. So what we've done here, we keep many of our fossorials in 30 by 30 by 30 cubes. And depending on what type of fossorial they are, we will go anywhere from about 2/3 full of soil down to about half filled with soil. Now, the important thing to remember here is not the depth of the substrate. The substrate is not important in the whole picture. What we're looking at is getting our environmental aspects correct. So if we've got a fossorial spider that requires much higher humidity, it likes a real damp sort of environment in which to live in, we will give more soil because it's easier to maintain that humidity in a greater depth of soil. It's nothing to do with how our spider burrows. We're not interested with that at the moment. We are looking at getting our parameters correct. If we've got a spider that's a fossorial spider that can live in a semi sort of arid environment, we can afford to go half fill our tank, and we can go accordingly like this. So we can change it depending on how much moisture content we require in our soil. So that's the most important thing to think of with your fossorial spider. Now, in terms of enclosure size for a fossorial spider, it doesn't need a massive tank, a massive enclosure. It just doesn't need it because it lives in a hole. Yeah. So you could give it one the size of this desk. It would make an absolutely beautiful display enclosure. But if we just need to keep our spider or breed our spider or whatever, we don't need this space. We can keep it down to a much smaller space. Many of ours we keep in 20 by 20 by 30s, which is a 20 cube, 30 high, and they work equally well. They do everything. Now, when we talk about substrate depth, one of the things that confuses many people, especially newcomers to the hobby, is why do they require deep substrate? The simple answer is they don't. They seriously do not require deep substrate to have a healthy spider. Many of the things that our spiders, the problem is, in the hobby, we get people will always quote, in the wild, this spider lives 3 foot underground. Well, that might well be the case, but he's indoors. He's in the beastie room. It's not exactly the same, is it? It's an entirely different environment. So all we need to do is we find out 3 foot down in the wild, he has a good humidity content within his soil. So we replicate that in our soil, and that gives us the environment that we need. We don't need to be 3 foot deep. The reason he's 3 foot deep in the wild is probably because it's a very hot climate or something like that. It keeps him away from predators, stuff like that, you know. In a captive situation, we take away all of them aspects. So the only thing that we need to worry about is the humidity in the soil, the temperature within our room or our enclosure, and food. Now we control every aspect of that. So when we can make life easier for ourselves by controlling the substrate depth, will help us control the humidity levels within our soil, because obviously the less soil you have in your enclosure, the quicker it dries out. The more soil we have in there, the longer it will take to dry out, but most importantly, the more stable that environment will become. So, and that's the key, is the stability of the environment that you're actually creating. So we can make life easier for ourselves by giving that little bit more substrate. But that being said, even my deep fossorial spiders, none of them have got any more than possibly 5 to 6 inches of soil. They really don't need it. They seriously don't. And these guys all breed and do everything as everything else does within the beastie room. So, you know, again, it's coming back to us. The information is coming back that we don't need this. But the key point is we look on it in a completely different way. We take away all of that human emotion. Don't get hung up worrying about different things. It's the actual parameters of your environment. That is all that you need to be worrying about. In terms of size of enclosure in like spiders needing space, we often get thrown at us that spiders out in the wild, they've got a whole jungle, they've got a whole desert, grasslands, you know, they can go off, you know, I don't know, maybe they pack their bags and go on holiday for a little while, come back a week later. I've no idea. But the thing is, in the wild, if a spider, you can argue about territory size. Now, territory covers many animals across the system. And spiders do have a territory as well. But if the food is plentiful, that territory will be small, because the spider doesn't need to go anywhere to find food. The food is there, so it doesn't need to go anywhere. If food is sparse, then that territory will get bigger. Yeah? And this happens with all animals. If you look at, I don't know, look at big cats for argument's sake, a pride of lions. If they're in a prey-rich environment, they will not wander far. They might actually literally hunt within, say, a 5-mile range of their home. If food is scarce, like when the weather changes and it dries out, they lose all the herding animals, everything disappears. That 5 miles now turns into a 20-mile radius because they have to go further to find food. That is the only reason they are travelling. They don't need 20 miles to be happy. They were far happier with 5 miles and food on the doorstep. So this is what you need to get your heads around. Take away that emotion. With a spider, you are popping food into its environment. You are basically popping food onto its doorstep. So that spider has got no reason to leave that web hammock, leave that hole in the ground, or go anywhere at all. We got terrestrial spiders that actually lay a little piece of webbing mat on the floor. In actual fact, we can look at our Brazilian white knee, our big adult female. She's in a nice big display tank. Do you know what? She hardly ever goes anywhere. She puts that little bit of mat down. The only time we get her to wander around is if we cut back on the food. And then when she starts to get hungry, she'll start wandering around and having a look about, see if she can find a bit of food. As soon as we feed her again, she goes straight back to her little web mat and sits there for 3 weeks. Don't do a thing. So it's all about understanding what makes your spiders tick and what they actually need. Not what you think they need, what they actually need. Right. So that being said, we will now have a little look at some of our spiders. I think what we'll have a look at some of our fossorial setups first, just to give an idea of how things change. Now, if we have a look up in here, this is our Melopius alba striatum, which is the Thai zebra. Now, these are what you would class as a strictly fossorial spider. And you can see here, this one has got a web entrance there. She's also built a turret at the back, which you can see as well. So she's got 2 entrances to her home. She actually sits in the front here, right down here, which is perfect for us because it means we're waiting for this girl to drop an egg sac. And it means that by being down in here, we will get to know the day it's dropped. We will find out, we will see it. But the point is, even though it's a strictly fossorial spider, it doesn't need massive depth. Everything is provided for it, so it never leaves this tiny little tunnel here. It never goes anywhere. It stays there. Now, if we come over this side a little bit, you'll see in this enclosure here, this is exactly the same spider. This is a Thai zebra as well, another adult female, and she is webbed up the top. She hasn't dug a burrow at all. So she's stayed, she is up in that webbing. She is living like a versicolor. She's made herself a web tunnel up there if this was in the wild, that would be up in the lower branches, you know, just off the floor. That's in the bottom scrub, and that is where she's made her home. So you can never fully tell, although they are a fossorial spider, because absolutely everything is covered here. Everything is given to this spider to live a perfect life. So she doesn't need to dig a 3-foot hole, you know? It all depends on how they're most secure. She is a very secure spider. Now then, if we come down a bit, we can, actually this is another good one down in here. If we just have a look in here, this is our GBB female. And we've had a couple of comments saying, oh, you should give your GBBs more to burrow in. They like to dig holes and live in the ground. Well, I've not got one here yet, and I think we've got 6 or 7 GBBs here in the room, and not one of them burrows. They all live on the top. They web it up heavily on the top. And this is what I would say they do in the wild. They live as a terrestrial species, but then they will go up into the lower branches of a bush. So if you've got a shrub that sits, say, 1 foot, 2 foot off the floor, they will use that first foot of brush. All that small branches and everything, they will web all of that up and they will create their own little world inside that. But they've not dug down. They're staying up and they're in that top piece. So it's very interesting how they do it. Now, if we go, we can come straight down and we can have a little look into our Balfouri colony. Now, we got 30 plus Balfouri in here. You wouldn't think it, would you? They're all hidden away at the moment, and this is because we fed them yesterday, so they've all had an absolute fill of crickets, and you can still probably see the odd cricket still moving around in there. So they get plenty of food. Now, as you can see here, this is purely for display purposes. They don't need this space. They don't need a huge amount of space. And providing we apply plenty of anchor points and what have you, they don't need deep substrate either. And in terms of knowing what is going on, this system works really, really well. If you look online, one of the big complaints that we hear from people that are keeping Balfouris in communals is, I never know how many I've got. I never see them. You know, they're always tucked away. And you normally find out that most of them have got them in a deep substrate and they don't see them. So they all literally just disappear. So if you want to see your spider, you can arrange its enclosure to suit so that you actually get to see more of what you're keeping. That is not in detriment to your spider, provided you cover all of the parameters that make that spider a healthy spider. That's the most important thing. Now, if we look down here, we can, this is our giant whiteney, and you can see again, she's in a lovely big enclosure, and this is what we would class as like a display enclosure. Now, if you see behind her, you can see that webbing on the floor. It's looking a bit old and tattered, and this is because she's constantly sitting on it, and she's not really moving it. This is what she used to molt out in. This was her old molt bed, but she's not used anything else. So that is slowly but surely deteriorating. Now, she won't move off of that until she's hungry, and then she might go for a little wander around. And if we deny her of food, she will wander a bit more. You know, if we wanted to go back to her mat, then all we do is we feed her a roach, she'll eat her roach, by tomorrow morning she'll be sat on her mat again and she won't move for another couple of weeks. So what I'm saying to you is, if you make sure that all of your parameters are correct for the health of your spider, then that is all you need to be worrying about. And that will give you a perfectly good spider. Right, so that being said, I hope we've managed to cover a few things that we do here. This is all I can say is this is what we do here in the Beastie Room, and we have good success. One of the things that we will not pass on to you guys anything that isn't tried and tested. And by being tried and tested, I mean we've done it many times, so we know what the problems are, and we know the ins and outs of whatever we do, and everything that you see here is being done all the time, and this is what it's all about. The whole thing, the whole room, everything is tried and tested. So it's not the only way of doing things, but it's what works for us, and hopefully it can work for you guys as well. Right, well, I hope you found that interesting. I think what we'll do is later on in the future we'll do another one, and we'll cover some of the other common myths and things that come across the hobby, some of the age-old problems. Maybe next time we can cover mesh tops and humidity, maybe do something like that, but we'll come to them later. We'll see how this one goes first, see what you think about it. If you've got any questions, don't forget, throw them down in the comments. Sensible questions only, please. Don't ask me what size your spider needs to go in again. Hopefully we've covered that. Yes, hopefully we've covered all of that. And the most important factor is that it's more about the environment. Yeah, your spider's environment is far more important than the size enclosure that you're keeping it in. Yeah, environment is key. We need to keep them happy. And by giving them a big enclosure or a small enclosure doesn't necessarily do that. It's what goes on within. That's what gives you a happy, healthy spider. And hopefully you'd have seen that with our spiders. We've got a lot of happy, healthy spiders. And that is what we're aiming to try and put out there. That's what we want people to understand and show that there's many new ways. You know, an awful lot of information within the hobby is very old information. For some reason or other, as a hobby, we're not moving forward. We should be moving forward. So open your minds, open your eyes, and have a fresh look at things, and try some of these things out and see if they work for you. It's the best way forward. Right then, well, I hope you enjoyed that and you get something out of it. Don't forget, hit the like button. It really does help us. Check out some of the old videos. You know, we've got a lot of videos now, and we've covered pretty much most things. If there's anything new that you guys would like to see or hear about, put them in the comments. I'm not guaranteeing anything, but if it's possible we can do it here, we will certainly look into creating a video for that. Right then, don't forget, be calm, be gentle, and love your spider. And I'll see you soon, guys.